Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, heart racing, covered in sweat, and unable to shake the feeling that something is terribly wrong? That's exactly what happened to Sarah on that fateful night. Little did she know, her nightmare was about to become a reality. Sarah had always been a light sleeper, but this was different. The darkness in her room seemed thicker, more oppressive than usual. As she lay there trying to calm her nerves, she heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from somewhere in the house. At first, she tried to convince herself it was just the house settling, or maybe a tree branch scraping against the window. But as the minutes ticked by, the sound grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from inside the walls. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. Could it be mice? But the sound was too loud, too deliberate for such tiny creatures. Her heart pounded in her chest as she slowly sat up in bed, straining her ears to pinpoint the source of the noise. The scratching stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Sarah held her breath, afraid that even the slightest movement would alert whatever was making that sound to her presence. Then, just as she was about to convince herself it was all in her head, she heard it again. This time it was coming from right behind her headboard. With trembling hands, Sarah reached for her phone on the nightstand. She needed to call someone, anyone. But as her fingers brushed against the cool surface of her device, she froze. There, in the faint glow of her phone screen, she saw it, a long, skeletal finger curling around the edge of her headboard. Sarah's scream caught in her throat as she scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over her tangled sheets in her haste to get away. She ran for the door, her mind a whirlwind of terror and disbelief. This couldn't be happening. It had to be another nightmare. But as she reached for the doorknob, she realized with horror that it wouldn't turn. She was trapped. The scratching sound intensified, now coming from all around her. The walls seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and Sarah could swear she heard whispers, countless voices speaking in languages she couldn't understand. Desperately, she pounded on the door, screaming for help. But her cries were drowned out by the cacophony of scratches and whispers that filled the room. The air grew cold, and Sarah could see her breath misting in front of her face. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah turned slowly, her back pressed against the door, eyes wide with fear as she scanned the room. That's when she saw them. Dozens of pairs of glowing eyes peering at her from every shadow, every dark corner of her once familiar bedroom. She blinked, hoping it was just a trick of the light. But when she opened her eyes, the creatures were closer. Their bodies were twisted, inhuman shapes that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Long, spindly limbs ended in razor-sharp claws that clicked against the hardwood floor as they inched towards her. Sarah's mind reeled. This couldn't be real. She squeezed her eyes shut, silently begging to wake up from this nightmare. But when she opened them again, the creatures were mere inches from her face. She could feel their hot, rancid breath on her skin, smell the decay that clung to their grotesque forms. As the first creature reached out its clawed hand towards her, Sarah's scream finally broke free. It echoed through the room, filled with all the terror and desperation of a soul facing its darkest fears. But even as she screamed, she knew it was futile. No one would hear her. No one would come to save her. In that moment, as the creatures closed in around her, Sarah realized the true horror of her situation. This wasn't a nightmare she could wake up from. This was her new reality, a waking nightmare from which there was no escape. The last thing Sarah saw before the darkness consumed her was a sea of glowing eyes and razor-sharp teeth. And as consciousness slipped away, she heard a voice, ancient and terrible, whisper in her ear, "Welcome to your eternal nightmare." When Sarah's family found her the next morning, she was huddled in the corner of her room, eyes wide and unseeing, muttering incomprehensibly about creatures in the walls and eternal darkness. The doctors called it a psychotic break, a manifestation of severe night terrors. But Sarah knew the truth. She had glimpsed a world beyond our own, a realm of nightmares made flesh. And now that world would never let her go. So the next time you wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing and covered in sweat, remember Sarah's story and ask yourself, is it really just a bad dream? Or is something watching you from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to drag you into its nightmare realm. Sweet dreams, if you dare to sleep at all.